What? Okay, let's look at the other pessimistic option, because we're talking like this is over. How could this break out again? What can happen there? What can go wrong?
Yeah, no, like I said, the optimist in me would like to agree, but I tend to be a bit more pessimistic. I think it's going to be a too difficult defeat to accept. They have. I don't think that in a rational world, I think you just have to accept this defeat and move on. But I don't think that is possible. I think the political costs are too high. So no, I think there's going to be probably. Well, I would suspect that Trump starts to talk himself. What's a good way of framing it? Well, in order for Trump to survive politically, after he essentially conceded the defeat to the Iranians, I think he's going to have to try to talk himself out of it. That is, to begin to contest Iran's control over Hormuz. He's going to have to contest a lot of things, and at some point, the pressure is going to be too high. But also with Iran, they might. In any war, you have a lot of problems. The losing side gets too desperate. Again, you can see this in Europe, while the winning side can be struck with hubris. I think this is with Iran as well. If there's some attacks against Palestinians, the Iranians can, we're going to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, this could go to their heads as well. So if they overplay their hand, you may have a problem. And I think I told you this before. This is my concern about Europe as well. Now that the Europeans, we're losing in our war against Russia, we're getting more and more desperate and do stupid things, while the Russians, they feel the victory. They might start shoot down our drones and all over the Black Sea soon, and get to be too cocky, and then you have all the ingredients for a big clash. So I think you can see a similar scenario playing out.
That's a really good point. That's a really good point. Really good angle. We're talking like Iran had a resounding win. I don't think that's the case either. Iran they won strategically, but I don't think they had a resounding win. Their military capabilities have been pummeled. Like I was speaking to General McKenzie, and obviously he thinks that the US did not even strategically lose in his view, and it's too early to say that. But he said, Mario, like at CENTCOM when we did, obviously he couldn't share any classified intel, but he said, Mario, at CENTCOM when we did those simulations of what an Iranian attack would look like, we would have expected significantly more destruction, a lot more missiles fired at once. Wouldn't have expected a missile here, a missile there, a few drones there, a few drones there. He was surprised by their capability to keep firing that amount of drones. That was a surprise. But in terms of missiles, he thinks the reason they weren't firing many missiles is because of the US and Israeli capabilities of locating the launchers quickly and striking them. Now, I know there's different leaks that 50% of the missiles are still there, 20%, 30% are still there. Different sources say different things. And it's hard to trust which wasn't true and which ones are intentionally leaked for whatever reason. But going to his point, maybe Iran's capabilities have been degraded significantly. Remember, that's the same Iran that was barely surviving in January, dealing with the revolution. That's the same government that wasn't that popular before the war, may not be that popular after the war, because a lot of people might blame the regime, the IRGC's foreign policy, to getting the country into this war, to getting the country into this economic mess and getting the country to sanctions. And they might look at like the Gulf and say, why don't we do the same thing as the Gulf, which are flourishing? So there is a lot of people in Iran that are upset with there's even reports and videos coming out that people are still resisting militarily, going at a checkpoint, a besieged checkpoint, and shooting the people there. So maybe Iran is a lot weaker than we give them credit for. They haven't retaliated for the attacks on Lebanon. They should have retaliated on the same day. They said Pakistan convinced them for restraint, but Israel is still striking Hezbollah, and Iran is still, talking the talk, but they haven't walked the walk. They closed the Strait of Hormuz. They've stood their ground on the sanctions, on the negotiations. Sorry, they're like, we're not going to start the negotiations until the strikes on Hezbollah stop. So they are standing their ground, but not to a massive extent. So I don't think there's not much hubris. Maybe there will be soon when they rebuild their military, but they might be a lot weaker than people think.
Well, one shouldn't exaggerate. Their rise to great power status just yet. I mean, they do. You mentioned before they have a nuclear weapon now, the Strait of Hormuz. I noticed that the former president of Russia, Dmitry Medvedev, he more or less said the same thing. And
I got it from him. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay. Well, it's a good point. It is quite a powerful instrument. So, but that doesn't mean that they've exited this without a scratch. I mean, they've taken a lot of destruction to their energy facilities, towards their infrastructure, towards their industries, and of course the population, the military. A lot of it has been harmed. It's going to take not just years, it could take decades to fix some of these things, irrespective of them, pulling in 100 billion a year in toll from the Strait of Hormuz. So no, I wouldn't exaggerate the extent. They will be successful. You can. Well, I wouldn't compare it. Well, it can be comparable, for example, to the situation of the Soviet Union after the Second World War. It was in a geopolitical, a very powerful position, but of course the whole country was burned to the ground. So, you don't want to exaggerate, but this is just the hubris part. There's other things that can go wrong too. This war was not only between the U.S. and Iran. You mentioned Israel, which may have an interest to sabotage. But what about Iraq? They more or less, liberated themselves from Western troops. Why shouldn't Iraq also seize Kuwait? They can, and there's many who'd like to, and I don't think the Iranians would necessarily oppose. And there's just a lot of small things. Once they attacked Iran, they opened up a big can of worms, which. Again, I'm not saying that the Iraqis will take Kuwait. I'm just saying that's like one out of many possibilities.
When you go from 0 to 100, then everything below 100 becomes fair game.
Yeah. No. So it's just so many things which are up in the air now, and what will happen to the whole anti-Iranian alliance if the Gulf states decide that we have to make peace? Even the Israelis might decide we have to make peace. If you remember back when the Chinese were pushing for this improved relations between the Saudis and the Iranians, well, at that point, I remember the former head of Mossad went out in the media and said, listen, if they're going to make peace with Iran, are we going to be the only one standing alone in an anti-Iranian alliance? We don't really have that much, disputes with them. I think the Israelis know that they exaggerated the nuclear threat and all of this. I think it was a way of making Israel's opposition to Iran, essentially making it America's problem, because Iran is in no way a threat to the US. Only if they had nuclear weapons and they were ruled by people who are crazy, irrational, and want to burn the world, then it's America's problem. So I think a lot of the narratives, a lot of the conflicts could die down. But again, this is an optimistic expectation. I'm expecting more with this massive shift in the balance of power to have more negative impacts on security.
I have another point. I'll repeat one of the points you've made that is more on the optimistic side, is that China has a lot more influence in the region now. And a lot of people are moving more to China as being the stable superpower in the world, which is heartbreaking to see because I want the US to be there or Europe or any democracy. But anyway, China's proving itself to be the stable country that's following international law. So if China has more influence in the region, can't they do what they did between Iran and Saudi, do it again between Iran and the Gulf? And if that does happen, again, I'm repeating a point you've made, but it's an important point. If that does happen, then first Israel will be like, what about us? Now it's like us against the world. So we have to join and start finding a way to improve relations with Iran rather than degrade them and mow the lawn every few years. And that could lead to a time of prosperity. I know we've opened up a can of worms that could lead to more stability, and it's very possible. But also, if you have that, most issues in the Middle East, after Iraq, Afghanistan war with the US, everything afterwards, in Lebanon, in Syria, even the clashes in Iraq, etc., was all because of the power struggle in Yemen, obviously, between Israel, Saudi, and Iran. Lebanon is the best example. You had the Sunni group in Saudi, the Hariri, the Future movement that was supported by Saudi, and then Hezbollah assassinated some of them, and they were supported by Iran. Then they got the Americans supporting the ones that were supported by Saudis. Israel is like backing, I don't know who in the background. They used to have a group in the militia in the south of Lebanon as well. So you got all these different countries having their hands in that pot. Now, if all these countries stop their power struggle, then the proxy wars also stop. So maybe we do see what Trump talked about. Trump did a post today about the Great Reset or something along the lines. There is a scenario, as someone who, just like you, Glenn, has been very critical of the war, there is a scenario that we may actually see a great reset in this. If Trump plays the right cards now, he can turn a spectacular failure into possibly a spectacular success by changing the face of the Middle East and literally taking a U-turn. Instead of going with Israel to destroy Iran, telling Israel, smacking him in the face, telling them, guys, stop striking Hezbollah, which is happening, by the way. He gave him a deadline, reportedly, and telling Israel, normalize relations with Iran. And then maybe even the US works with China to normalize relations. Now, that's a bit too far-fetched, too optimistic, because there's always that struggle between China and the US. But it could be a race between those two countries. The one that makes peace now is the one that will have more influence in the region. So we may see China and the US both try to be the ones that make peace in those countries. And Trump wants a peace, the other piece, P-I-E-C-E, a piece of the Strait of Hormuz as well. So we might end up having from the great failed war to the great business, the greatest business deal of our generation, that is Iran and the US building a toll booth in the Strait of Hormuz. And so you never know, but